It gives me great pleasure to introduce a man that has helped many, many business owners and that just knows his business in selling and positioning business owners to get the value that they've built up within their businesses, Mike Ertel. Mike, come on in. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me.
If you want to just to get the mic, I guess it fell off there.
I did it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Probably need some help with this.
Let's do it the right way.
Yeah. Why take a chance?
So as we set that up, the one thing I want to set up, Mike,
Good.
is how did you get involved? Before we get into, because this is all content-based, and I got a lot of questions. How did you get involved to become a M&A, they call M&A mergers and acquisition specialist, and what side of that fence do you work usually? And if you could just give us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in that whole field.
Very briefly, I have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in business. And I spent 35 years working for basically large companies. Marketing, manufacturing, logistics, general management, and was recruited down to Florida to be the president and COO of a company called Premier Bedding. And when that company was acquired, and they didn't need me to run it anymore, I loved Florida and started looking to buy a business. And I was trying to meet brokers and M&A specialists and see what kind of businesses were available. And my wife was observing me put all these spreadsheets together and said, I just want to make one observation. She said, I realize that when you find a business that you think we ought to buy, you're prepared to go all in. And I just want to point out that I'm already 60 and you will shortly be 60. If you're just this much wrong in all of those calculations, we won't have time to make it back up. And I was violent. You know, this was my big chance, and how could you be so disloyal, and it was the American dream, and how could... Then I started thinking, you know, if I put $2 million of my own money into a business, and I borrowed $8 million from a bank, and at the time interest rates were 8 to 10%, the monthly payments I would be making would keep you up nights. So I've been thinking, well, she might really have a point here. And so then I started thinking that I hadn't met that many brokers or M&A specialists that I was that terribly impressed with, and a lot of business owners probably need help making that transition, and maybe that could be an opportunity for me because I had an excellent background. So that's really how I got started. I was looking to buy my own business and decided that I could help other people buy and sell theirs. And the second part of your question was, what do I specialize in? I primarily represent sellers. Up until this year, about 90% of my practice has been representing sellers, but and 10% has been representing buyers. But since the first of the year, it's been about 50-50. It's been amazing how many buyers have been approaching me about their willingness to hire me to help them find the right business and get it closed and financed and so on. So,
have you seen, and this is a curious question because I'm sure a lot of us are thinking, in 2012, have you seen increased activity, or have you seen more activity on the M&A side in the mergers acquisitions than you have in the past?
Oh yeah, the market was very frothy from about, I got into the business about 2000, fourth quarter of 2000. The market was very frothy for about 5, 6, 7 years. And then it cooled considerably in 08, 09, 2010 were very slow. Many of the banks were no longer lending money to people who wanted to acquire a business. Many small businesses had trouble borrowing money just to run their current business, much less acquire a business. So it was very, very thin, very difficult. It's gotten much more active in the last 6 months, and it's gotten very active in the last 90 days.
In your vantage point, why do most business owners, the ones that you deal with, why did they ever start that business? What was the catalyst that most business owners start a business?
I don't know that there's one single reason. a lot of the people that I work with who now run a business came up through that business, and at some point the owner wanted to retire and they were in a position that they could step into an ownership position. Some people started from scratch. Some people are psychologically not well suited to work for anybody else,
Right.
and they're better off by finding a business that they can manage.
And in talking about properly positioning your business for sale, why would someone, let's say someone in this room says, I'm not really focused on selling my business anytime soon. Why would every business owner really need to understand that it's important to always be positioning your business properly for sale?
Most small business owners, in my experience and from some national statistics, have 70 to 90% of their total net worth tied up in their business. They either have funded it with a lot of their own money, or they've personally guaranteed the bank loans that they've needed to grow their business. And so it is, in most cases, the largest single asset that the business owner has to manage. And it was, I have 3 daughters, and my advice to them as they were growing up is, you want to get in the habit of every year updating your resume and updating your personal financial statement just to see if you're progressing. Are things getting better? Are they about the same, or are they going the wrong way? If you own a business, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family to check in. It doesn't have to be going up every year without fail, but over the long term, it ought to be steadily improving. And when it comes time to retire, it may well be that the quality of your retirement, your ability to do any charitable gifting, your ability to create a legacy, your ability to determine the date that you want to leave the business is going to be a function of how good a job did you do building it to the point where it's saleable and it's going to bring an optimum price. So I don't think that you have to be of a mind that you're going to sell it every day of the week or any given year, but having an eye to the fact of, am I doing the things that are making this business more valuable and more attractive and more saleable, ought to be part of your long-term vision for the business.
So can you give us the metrics that you look at as someone that evaluates businesses, that the key metrics that tell us the heartbeat of this business is good, it's something that I might recommend one of my buyers to purchase? What are the metrics that Mike Ertel looks at?
All right. Most of you have heard that the 3 most important measures in the value of real estate are location, location, location. When it comes to valuing an ongoing business, the 3 most important measures are cash flow, cash flow, and cash flow. Now, just like real estate, they're not the only things that determine the value, but they are by far the most important, the driving force in why one business is worth more than another. Other things that come into play are how stable is the cash flow? Is it cyclical with the economy and it goes way up and then comes way down? Stable, growing cash flows are more valuable businesses than cyclical. Another factor is customer concentration. If all of your business is building one product for Walmart, and everybody knows that they're a very difficult customer to satisfy, and an awful lot of companies have gone out of business when they lost Walmart as a customer, then the value of your business is going to be negatively affected by the fact you have all this concentration with one large customer, or 3 or 4 customers that represent 80% of your business is too much customer concentration. Another factor that people look at is the depth of management. I don't care how large your business is, you could be Michelangelo Inc. and doing millions of dollars a year in fine art. But when you pass and you haven't trained anybody to do what you've been doing, or when you get ready to retire and you haven't trained anybody to do works of art equal to what you've been producing, your business might be worth 0. So it's not so much a function of size, it's a function of how have you set the business up so that someone else could come into this business and take it over and not miss a beat. And to the degree that you can do that and you can plan for that, and basically ease yourself out of a hands-on job and ease yourself into a more of a strategic role. You guide the business for the future. You thinking about the long-term strategy of the business. That business is much more saleable than one where every dollar of revenue depends upon your producing the product and maintaining the customer relationship.
How do you deal with clients or people out there that make a lot of money,
Yeah.
but on paper they probably lose money at the end of the year, and they say, hey, my business makes tons of money, you know, and then you're looking at, what are the financials that people look at in order to invest in that company, and how do you deal with something like that?
Okay. It's an excellent question, by the way. Most businesses' financial statements are prepared with the intent to file a tax return. And most business owners manage their business so that they don't pay any more in taxes than they absolutely have to. And so your books and records, based on your tax return or based on the financials that went into preparing your tax return, do a very poor job of presenting your business with the presumably robust cash flow that business is generating for you. You've done a good job of tax planning so that you're paying little in taxes, but those documents don't help you. And one of the frustrations that business owners have is if you go to your bank and you take them your last year's tax return and your financial statements leading up to that tax return, the bank looks at it and they're not clairvoyant, you know, they're not going to read between the lines. They're going to say, geez, there's not enough here for me to lend you any more money because it doesn't look to me like you could pay back any more loans. So what you need to do is maintain a set of books that recasts the discretionary expenses and the non-recurring expenses and the extraordinary expenses that and the non-cash expenses. A major one is depreciation. Most businesses have a very significant expense item called depreciation. It is a perfectly legitimate expense. But if you think about it, you don't write any checks to a vendor called depreciation, okay? That money really doesn't ever leave the building. That's part of the cash your business generated that is shielded from tax because the government allows you to take depreciation. So as you're thinking about how much more lending can this business support or how much cash flow does this business generate for a new owner, you need to analyze and recast your financial statements to add back all of those legitimate expenses that are not draining the cash or may not be expenses for the next owner and truly reflect the cash flow this business is generating.
Mike, can you talk about some of the acronyms that are used in your industry that maybe a lot of people aren't used to? There's one that you use all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm always asking you.
Yeah, you're always asking me what it means. There are actually two.
Okay.
There are actually two. In my experience, the market for buying and selling an ongoing business needs to be divided into those businesses that are owner-operator businesses, where the owner expects to be active in the day-to-day running of the business directly. And those businesses where it's going to be professionally managed and investors are going to be buying this business. For an owner-operator business, the most significant, most meaningful measure of cash flow is what's called seller's discretionary cash flow, and it's sometimes abbreviated SDCF, or sometimes it's called owner benefit. But this is a measure of all the cash the business generates before, and you've added back interest and taxes and depreciation and amortization. You've added back all of the extraordinary expenses. You've added back every nickel of compensation that the owner or his family is receiving from this business, presuming that they're maybe not earning a fair market salary. In some cases, business owners have their college-age children on the payroll, and they don't even come in to draw a salary.
Sure.
Those are all added back to create seller's discretionary cash flow. And most brokers, Main Street brokers, would look at that number and look at a multiple of seller's discretionary cash flow to determine what would the market pay for that business. As you get above about $1 million to $1.5 million in cash flow, seller's discretionary cash flow, or as you get above $1 million, $1.5 million in revenues, you start attracting a more professional buyer. And that buyer is thinking that I'm not going to manage that business myself. I'm going to hire someone to be the general manager. And so I'm going to have an expense for the fair market value of a general manager. And so when I look at the cash flow, I want to look at an acronym they call EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's similar to seller's discretionary cash flow, but it subtracts the fair market compensation of a general manager, okay? Now, in some cases, if you've been running the business and your wife's been the bookkeeper, you've got a college son that's earning, $10,000 a year, you're adding back all of the compensation that you're paying your family and then subtracting what would it cost you to hire a part-time bookkeeper to do the work that your wife's been doing, what would it cost to hire a general manager to do the work you've been doing, and the number you're trying to arrive at is what is the normalized EBITDA that would be the cash flow to an investor who has to hire those people at market value.
You bring up a good point. How big does, so a lot of people would do the seller's discretionary cash flow.
Yeah.
Would be a lot in this room, let's say, they would use that when they're looking at a metric. But
Right.
how big does someone grow a company to where venture capitalists start looking at their company as a possible buyout?
Let me in the world of private capital, venture capitalists are private equity sources who are looking for a startup company that has a growth idea. They're willing to invest in startups. Most of my clients are not startups. Most of my buyers are not looking for a startup. The next group is called private equity groups. They tend to be investors in growth. They won't invest in a startup, but they'll invest in a company that has a proven revenue and a proven cash flow, and they just need a little more cash and maybe some additional management skills to take that company from $1 million company to a $10 million company. So when you ask the question about venture capital, you'd get a different answer than private equity. And the interesting thing about private equity is there are probably 4,000 to 6,000 private equity groups in the world, and the lion's share of them are interested in acquiring companies in the United States. We have a relatively stable economy, and we have a very stable government, so there's not risk that the government's going to take it over or the militia is going to overthrow the government. So you can invest in the United States with a lot of confidence that you're making a safe investment. Of those 6,000 firms, they're typically looking for several $1 million of EBITDA to acquire a platform. But once they're in your space, let's say they already own 20 tanning salons and they've got a critical mass of $4 million in EBITDA from all the tanning salons, they would willingly look at one tanning salon if it could be added to the platform they already have. So you get two answers. One is, if they don't have anything in your space, it might be a very high hurdle rate before they would be willing to invest. If they already have something in your space, then size is not an issue.
So at times it's like Monopoly. There's one left on whatever Park Place, and they need it. So if they need it, they'll pay a premium to get that small business that's operating, but it's in their territory, and they don't mind paying a good premium for it.
And this gets to another point, and I don't mean to jump ahead of your questions, but one of the reasons for a small company, an owner-operator company, the ground rules are, in 99% of the cases, you must go to market with an asking price. It's like putting your house on the market. The market is conditioned to expect that there's going to be an asking price on that business. And people won't look at it a second time if there's not some sense of an asking price for that business. As you get into larger businesses, it's much more common that the business will go to market without an asking price. And the concept is this, just to the point you were making. If, and I'll use a poker analogy, hopefully that everybody could follow me. I know that Katie can follow me. You may be sitting with the 4 of clubs. And from where you're sitting, that doesn't seem like a very valuable card. And you would be tempted to put a relatively low price on it because it's only the 4 of clubs. But if a private equity group or a strategic buyer is holding the 2, 3, 5, 6 of clubs, and you're holding the 4, they might pay a lot more than you thought if they could get your 4 of clubs. So this doesn't work very well with very small businesses, owner-operator businesses. With a much larger business, we don't know what they're holding in many cases, and it would be a mistake, in my opinion, to go to market with an asking price because you're preempting them from making you the offer they would willingly have made and have been justified to offer because it's worth a lot to them to have that 4 of clubs. So I recommend to people who have the larger business, you go to market initially for 6 to 12 months without an asking price. If somebody's out there that was willing to pay a substantial premium, we'll find them in 6 to 12 months. After 6 to 12 months, if we haven't found them, we can always go back and add an asking price at that point.
Can you give us an example or story of how you helped a business owner that was really someone that put out, maybe an ad to try and sell their business, but then you came in, you were able to help them, and what they did wrong? Because I think we could learn from a case study.
I know the perfect case. I was approached several years ago by a business owner who had a very, I'm losing my mic.
That's right. If you could just put it right there, it'll pick up.
I'm good. They had a very specialized business in screen printing that one of their regular repeat customers was Caterpillar Tractor. Screen printing can be a very low-end printing process, and it's used a lot for doing big signs that say sale, whatever. It's not 4-color process, it's not high-end color. But if you're doing instrument gauges for a Caterpillar tractor, it's very precise printing, and that's what they did. And they did it on very expensive substrates, and they got a very attractive price for it. The owner of this business called me and said, I'm ready to turn this over to you because I've been trying to sell it for almost a year now, and I've cut the price to less than $1 million, and I've advertised it in the trade journals, and when people call me about it, which doesn't happen very often, I talk to them for a little bit, and they never call me back. I haven't gotten a single offer in the 7 or 8 months I've had it on the market. I'm ready for you to come and take this over. So fine, I went to meet him, and what I found he was doing was he had never recasted his financial statements, and when somebody would call and ask about his business, he would send them his tax return. And his tax return said he was only making $50,000 a year. And he had hoped to get $1.2 million or $1.3 million for his business, and he dropped the price to $995, and he still wasn't getting any takers. Because on paper, nobody in their right mind would pay $1 million for a business that only generated $50,000 for the buyer. Well, I wrote it up and got the listing and took his historical financial statements and his tax returns and interviewed the owner to find out if there were any extraordinary expenses and so on. And it turns out that his recasted seller's discretionary cash flow was $350,000. But nobody would know that from his tax return, okay? So we put a package together, which we always do, that described the business, and we screened the buyers, and you have to prove to me that you have the financial ability to do a deal this size, and you sign a confidentiality agreement. And before I will ever send you any detailed information. I'll send you a one-page summary that doesn't identify the business, but it tells you it's a printing company and it's doing so much in sales and so. But then you've got to prove up before I'm going to send you any more. So within 30 days of releasing the new book and the new blind teaser, we had 3 full price offers.
Wow.
2 of them were sight unseen, okay? We ended up selling the business actually to someone else. That gets to be another story altogether. But we ended up selling the business for a price of $1,450,000, which was 50% more than the last price he had asked for and hadn't gotten any nibbles on. Entirely because we knew how to package that business. We weren't telling any lies. We weren't, we were just appropriately presenting the business to a qualified buyer.
Now, when you're representing people that are selling or representing buyers to buy,
yeah,
as you're a broker, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
so you're in the transaction. What is it that you look for when you guys are looking at these different businesses that are being sold? What drives the value of these companies that your buyers are looking to buy these companies? Like you had talked about defensible niches. Can you explain defensible niches that make businesses worth much more than a regular, business that does everything like everybody else does?
Well, presumably every business should have a good reason why your customers come back and do business with you again. So a defensible niche can be as simple as location. You're the only laundromat within a mile of all these apartment complexes, all these condos. Maybe you're in the restaurant business and you're just very good at making people, you're the Cheers. Everybody feels at home. You've got a great menu, you've got specials, and you've got a lot of regular clientele. In a manufacturing context, it might be you can make parts that are tight tolerances that other people can't match, or you can service the client, where other people quote a 12-week lead time, you're able to get it done in 4 weeks. There are a lot of ways that you can develop a sustainable competitive advantage. It's not just one thing, but every business owner should be aware of what is it that I do, what is it that we do in my business that cause people to buy from us, okay? To the degree that you have a business model that's difficult to reproduce or completely unique, or you have a long history of doing something and everybody comes to you because of your reputation, all of those things make your business more attractive to a buyer because you've got something that is unique and defensible. If you can't figure that out, the only reason people are buying from you is because you'll cut your price lower than anybody else. And you're always at risk that tomorrow somebody will quote lower than you do and all of your customers will leave because the only reason they were coming is low price. That's not a very attractive niche, that's not a very defensible niche, and that's not going to bring a very good price from a buyer.
Now, in the Tampa Bay area, can you talk about the different industries, different kinds of businesses we have, and the multipliers? In other words, what tends to be the multiplier? If you could explain what a multiplier is so we know how you value a business. In very broad brush strokes. Very broad brush strokes. What Chris is alluding to is that if I'm right, and I think I am, right? If I'm right and most businesses value is driven by their cash flow, then the question is, how is the selling price related to the cash flow? And that becomes a multiple of the cash flow. If it's an owner-operated business with a lower cash flow, doing less than $1.5 million in revenue, so there's not a hard line at $1 million or $1 million, but generally speaking, a lower revenue owner-operator, the typical multiples of sellers' discretionary cash flow are between 1 times your annual
seller's discretionary cash flow, up to about 3 times. And it's somewhat a function of how transferable are the customers to a new owner, if it's a medical practice or an accounting practice, and the name physician and the name CPA of the firm retire, the expectation is a lot of those clients are going to go someplace else. I'm not going to pay a big multiple for that business because the owner was the business. On the other extreme, as you have a business that maybe is more involved in manufacturing or distribution, and it's a little bit larger and it's not so dependent on the owner, you see multiples that climb to 2, 2.5, 3 times of seller's discretionary cash flow. As you start talking about a larger business, $2, $3, $4, $5, $10 million in revenue and higher, start talking about EBITDA, the number is a little bit smaller because I've subtracted the seller's compensation, but the multiples are a little bit bigger. And I've done projects where it was kind of a toss-up as to whether it was an owner-operator business or it could have been an investor business, and actually you found that 3 times seller's discretionary or 4 times EBITDA came up with about the same number. The multiples of EBITDA typically run about 3 to 5 times. In fact, there's a very prestigious private equity group locally that did a presentation that I have a copy of, and if anybody in the audience would be interested, you can see me after and give me your business card and ask me for the PEG matrix. They said since 1985, after acquiring 130 businesses in a variety of industries, most of which were business-to-business service, distribution, or manufacturing, they always paid between 2 and 5 times EBITDA. Never paid more than 5 times, usually somewhere between 2 and 5. Okay, so that gives you a broad range. The other thing that's true about the business valuation is as your cash flow gets stronger, if you go from having $500,000 in EBITDA to $1 million in EBITDA, it's a little bit like, the analogy I've used is, the value of a business is driven by cash flow. The value of a diamond is driven by its weight, in addition to its clarity and color. So it's driven by its weight. But if you find a diamond that's over 1 carat, it's worth a premium over a diamond that's only 0.9 carats. Same thing happens with a business. You find a business that has $1 million in EBITDA, it's worth a little bit more than a business that's between 500,000 and $1 million.
Now, can you talk about how smaller companies, let's say under $1 million, how they could grow through mergers and acquisitions, and what are some strategies you've seen people do in order to acquire their competition?
This is a very common strategy, frankly, that private equity groups use. Is it's technically termed. Within the private equity community, they talk about roll-ups, and you initially buy a platform that is larger than average, larger than the average firm in that space. You're trying to buy a strong management team. You're trying to acquire a strong accounting function. You're trying to buy, hopefully, the ideal would be audited financial statements. Mm-hmm. In some industries, there may be computer programs that are helpful in managing multiple locations and larger operations. And if you buy a platform that has all of these things, you are in excellent shape then to add more locations or more companies to this platform. So private equity groups buy a business at 3 or 4 times EBITDA that have, in the beginning, $2 million of EBITDA, and they go out and they buy 10 more. And they pay 3 or 4 times for each one, but in the end they've got a company that's 10 times as large as the one they started with 10 or 12 times as much cash flow because there's some economies of scale. You can centralize the bookkeeping, you can centralize some of the purchasing, yada, yada, yada. Now they go back on the market and they've got a company they want to sell that's 10 times as large as the one they started, professional management, professional accounting, professional management information systems, much larger EBITDA. They'll sell it to somebody else for 6 times. So they paid 3 to 4 times, they sell it for 6 times. That's how they make their money.
And you could do that on a smaller scale where
Right.
someone might buy someone's book of business.
Right.
So if someone's in...
Yeah, same principles apply. Same principles apply. The caution I would give you, and a lot of business owners I think make this mistake. A lot of business owners think that your most likely buyer is a direct competitor. I used to work for some big companies. We bought a lot of companies. We occasionally bought our competitors. The truth of the matter is that if you have a direct competitor that already calls on some of your customers, already has salespeople that they're paying to go out and generate sales, already have delivery trucks, already have warehouses, already have inventory. Maybe they even have some of your customers and their customers buying some from you and buying some from them. Your book of business is not all new business to a competitor. They're looking at this and saying, if you would go out of business, some of your customers are going to come to me automatically. Why should I pay you a premium for a customer that my sales force has already been out there calling on? I'm already selling something to. If you fall on your face, they're going to come to me anyway. Why would I pay you top dollar for that customer, for that book of business? But if you've got a competitor, you do a great job in Tampa, but you don't cover Orlando. And somebody in Orlando does a great job in Orlando, but they don't have any sales in Tampa. They're really not a direct competitor of yours, but 100% of your business is incremental business for them. They will actually pay you a higher price because it's all incremental. If you're both covering Tampa, and I pay you a premium for your business, I'm almost, in the foreseeable future, I'm going to close one of the locations. I'm going to lay off some of the office staff as I consolidate the bookkeeping and the dispatching and so on. And so I'm going to write you a bigger check. I'm going to write you a premium check when I know going in that the only way this makes sense is if I start cutting it, laying it off, or cutting it out, or consolidating the space. Why would I pay for something that I don't need? If I'm from Orlando and I don't have a base of operations,
You're going to buy the whole operation.
I'm going to buy the whole thing, and I need the whole thing.
Yeah.
It makes sense. There will be some economy. I might centralize the billing, but that's minimal compared to being able to buy a plot of ground, a plot of the market that I didn't have before.
Can you talk about owner financing? A lot of times when you have business owners selling businesses, it's something that gets owner financed, or you have to carry a part of the note. How does that happen? When does that happen? And why does that happen?
Okay. It's very common in the sale of a business, even of a larger business. It's very common even sometimes in the sale of a business to a private equity group or a strategic buyer, that the buyer will ask the seller to carry some of the financing. In the Great Recession that we've all just lived through, 5 or 6 of the largest banks in the United States that did SBA loans for business acquisitions completely went out of the business of lending money to people who want to make an acquisition. So the only way you could finance the sale of a business through the darkest days of the Great Recession is if the seller was willing to carry a lot of the financing, or if the seller was willing to almost take the place of the bank. The buyer was hoping to buy it with 20 or 30% down, which he could do when the banks were lending, but when the banks left the scene, he didn't have enough money to pay cash. The seller had to come up for it. That's not a particularly attractive scenario for most sellers. It's not a scenario that I really highly recommend for most sellers. I think you are being promised a lender's return on what is essentially an equity holder's risk. You know, they want you to lend them the money at 8 or 10%, when in reality you've got the same risk as you were an investor, where your target return might be 20 to 30%. You are entirely dependent upon ever seeing that money on the success of the buyer, whom hopefully you've done a good job screening, hopefully you've done some due diligence, hopefully they've got a strong background, hopefully they're committed, but in reality you don't know how successful they're going to be running your business, and yet the realization of all the money that you've worked so hard to create and the value of your business is completely dependent upon the new owner. Having said that, and thankfully the market has returned and banks are back in the game, and SBA loans are readily available, and in fact they've raised the limits. The SBA loans now used to be capped at $2 million. You can borrow up to $5 million to buy a business with an SBA loan. It's still wise as a business owner for you to think about carrying 10% of the purchase price in a seller's note. The logic, in my opinion, is this. If you're trying to sell your business for $1 million and you meet the right buyer, and $1 million is just a little bit more than they can comfortably afford, or $1 million is just a little more than the bank can comfortably lend against, but the buyer's willing to pay it. He'd love to have your business, and he's willing to pay your price. And the bank can finance, the buyer can come up with $200,000, and the bank can lend $700,000. But to get your full price, you need to carry $100,000. If you're comfortable with the buyer, my advice would be that's a deal you might want to consider. It's certainly, there's no guarantee you're ever going to see the $100,000. But if you settle for 90% of your asking price the day of closing, I'll guarantee you're never going to see any more than $900,000. So you're making a bet, you're taking a position that has some risk, but there is the upside that you could see the $100,000 plus the interest on the $100,000. And if that's what it takes to make the deal attractive to all parties, I always advise my sellers that we're not going to advertise that there's any seller financing available. We're not going to promise anybody, and we're not going to promise the general public that you're already committed to carry a note. But if in the course of the negotiation, excuse me, if in the course of the discussion, you believe that this really is your buyer, and you really want to see this deal done, and it takes a little bit of seller financing to get the deal done, I would strongly recommend that you consider a modest amount of seller finance. To me, modest would be about 10%.
Mike, I got two more questions, and I have a lot of questions that came in. But one is, you represent buyers from other countries.
Yeah.
Why are these people from other countries? What is it that they want to accomplish when they come over here and they ask you, Mike, find me a business, I want to buy it? And what countries do you usually represent that they come into the Tampa Bay area and say, I want to buy a company?
I'm currently working with somebody from Ecuador, but the United States, as I mentioned earlier on, is a very attractive market for foreign investors. We have, in spite of the chaos of the current Republican nominating process, we actually do have, at its core, a very stable political system. We have a relatively stable economic system for all that you read about, compared to some other countries that have had hyperinflation and so on, compared to other countries where the government may seize private assets at will. There are a lot of people who've accumulated money who would like to move it to a safe place, and the United States is considered internationally a relatively safe place to put your money. Second reason that international buyers are interested is after 9/11, almost all of the loopholes to become a U.S. citizen got dramatically shut down. One of the largest single remaining loopholes is if you buy a company in the United States, And I don't specialize in this. There are other brokers that do, and if somebody in the audience is interested and they contact me, I can make some referrals to people that specialize in this. There are guidelines that if you're willing to buy a business for which you invest about $500,000, or between $500,000 and $1 million, and if you've got 10 employees, or if you're going to have 10 employees by the time you grow the business in your course of your business plan, you can apply for a permanent visa. And there's a very high probability, if you don't have a criminal record or whatever, very high probability that you can be granted permanent citizenship in the United States as a result of your being an investor in a private business. So those couple of factors make this is a very attractive country to invest in a business, and Florida is a particularly attractive area within the United States. A lot of people from Latin America, a lot of people from Europe, a lot of Canadians, a lot of Asians. If you're going to come to the United States, why go to North Dakota? Why not come to Florida? So it's a market you don't want to be unaware of, and because of the internet, it used to be very difficult to reach international buyers. Because of the internet, for essentially nothing, you can put a blind ad through a broker like myself, or there are some websites where you can for sale by owner that can be accessed by people all over the world for essentially nothing.
So I'm assuming that you see Florida is going to be a hotbed as we move forward for people all over the world.
Yep.
Building their businesses. So we're not even close to where this area is going to go economically.
No, I think the demographics of American business are such that I think there's 76 million Americans that are in the baby boomer generation, born in 1944, 45 through 1964. That group of Americans is just now reaching retirement age. Many of those people own businesses. Most of those people are or should be thinking about how am I going to transition out of this business so that I can retire, and the hope I would have for all of those people is that you get to choose the time, rather than having health or other circumstances force you to sell at a time that you really hadn't wanted to sell or really weren't prepared to sell. If you plan ahead, hopefully you'll be in a position to sell when the time is right and get the maximum amount for all of your years of hard work. That demographic was probably delayed by the Great Recession, in that there might have been people who wanted to retire, wanted to sell their business in 2009, 2010. There was very little going on in that time frame. But now the market's recovering, the banks are back in the game. 2012, 2013, 2014 should be very attractive times if you're thinking about selling, and they still should be good times if you're thinking about buying. Interest rates are still relatively very, very low. The best time to buy a business is when there's an expectation that the next couple of years are going to be attractive, as opposed to we're about to
Sure.
go into the dumpster.
And best time to sell a business?
Best time to sell a business is when you don't have to sell. If you've done a good job of bringing your business to the point where it's consistently throwing off a lot of cash, you've got lack of customer concentration, you've got some depth of management, you don't look like you're the only reason that the business continues on day after day, you're really in an ideal position to determine when you want to sell and consider offers that you don't have to accept the first offer that's made. And if you don't get a good offer this year, or your sales continuing to improve, cash flows continue to improve, your business may be worth more next year. The ideal time to sell, it's kind of like buying a stock. A lot of people want to buy your business if it looks like they can buy it today and it's going to be worth more next year. Very few people show up when it looks like your business is worth this much and next year it's going to be worth less. It's just human nature.
What is, as we wrap this up, what is some advice you would give our group of business owners with all of the knowledge and what you've seen with different business owners? What's just a piece of advice you'd leave us with when building a business and growing it each year and,
Yeah.
and working hard
Yeah.
in the trenches as you're building it
Yeah.
and trying to add employees and grow it
Yeah.
past the stages of growth from 100,000 to 500,000 to 1 million.
I'd probably go back to the advice that I gave my daughters, which is, I think every year you ought to do a resume, and if you own a business, it's more than a personal resume. It's kind of a description of where are you with respect to your overall life and the plan you had for your business, and then you ought to do a personal financial statement, and you ought to do you ought to make it your business to get get some advice. I'm not saying you have to do a formal appraisal every year, but you ought to sit with somebody, or you ought to get these rules of thumb, or and figure out, is my business worth more this year than last year? Is it still growing, or have I reached the point that, hey, it really hasn't grown in the last 10 years? What I see a lot with business owners is they lose their enthusiasm, and they lose their willingness to take a risk. And you basically starve the business of the resources and the energy it needs to continue to be viable. And you don't know it, but it's already starting to wither, and it could be worth less next year than it is this year once you've decided to pull back. It's very natural as you get older, or you have health issues, or you start thinking about retirement, that you don't want to go out and build a brand new plant from scratch and take all of that risk and consume all of that personal energy. But maybe at the point in time you start taking those risks, start losing your interest in taking those risks, you ought to start thinking about, how am I going to transition this to the next owner? Because somebody in their 40s might be thrilled
To take that
risk and keep the business going. And you maybe owe it to your customers and your employees to let somebody else come in while there's still a lot of momentum, and keep it going and keep it growing.
Well, with that, Mike, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Dennis, Eric, KT, Ingrid, everybody that was texting in questions. I got a bunch of them in. I know there's a lot more. I hope you could stay for a few. We're going to go down to Shula's after this. If you could stay to hang out with us, and we could ask some questions.
Sure.
I'd like to thank Mike Ertel for his information.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.